Hi, everyone, and welcome to this special episode of The Context. Super excited to have David here with us from Anthropic. Any of you who don't know, David is the founder or one of the founders of MCP, and as always, I've got Darren with me as well. So we're going to have a really fun chat today about MCP, the upcoming next release of the spec. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get into that. If you guys haven't already seen them, all of our sessions from the London MCP Summit are up on YouTube, including David's talk about where the protocol is going over the next 6 months. So take a look. You can find them on YouTube there. And if you haven't already put it on your calendar, we're going to be running the summit again in April, this time in New York City. It should be a lot of fun. We're going to be opening the call for proposals probably in the next week or so. It's actually getting quite close, and this is going to be a bigger and even more exciting opportunity to see how AI and platform systems and information are all coming together for kind of how organizations can adopt MCP, but even broader, build the next generation of agents. So very excited to be hosting this again. For the context, we're going to be back again tomorrow. We've been putting out, 2 episodes of every Thursday, it feels like, for the last few weeks. Things are going to slow down a little bit just because as we get into the holidays, we'll probably take a week off for Thanksgiving. And then obviously December will be a little bit slower as we've got a lot of different holidays coming up. So take a look. If you haven't already, we're always looking for great talks. Today, obviously, we're talking with David. Tomorrow, we're going to have Aisha from WSO2 coming in talking about agent identities, which should be interesting. And then we've got a couple of interesting talks next week before we take a week off for the holidays. So scan the QR code, join us, come present. We're always looking for people, especially people who are building cool new things. This is a place to come demo. It's a place to show what you're interested in and what you're building, your MCP servers, your tools for managing MCP servers or securing MCP servers or extending them, or any context you have. So with all that, let's get started. I am super excited to have David here. And this really just came about. I reached out to David last week and was saying I was excited for the next release and was hoping he could come in and talk about it. And we were able to find this time on his busy schedule. So David, thanks so much for joining us. It's great to have you here.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's nice to see you at home. I know you've been traveling a ton. Every time I've seen you lately, it feels like you've been somewhere else, not back in the UK. So hopefully,
yeah, it's been a bit busy for sure, but finally back home in cold, rainy UK and to enjoy the winter.
Next one of these we're doing in New York, so I'm sure it'll be great. We should do one in Barcelona, maybe, if we were planning better.
To be fair, it's not hard to be better than London in winter. So,
well, it's winter. It's winter here in Arizona, which means it's like clear skies and 70 degrees. That's our cold.
So I don't know why. Like, we always host these things in San Francisco, London, New York, Paris, and the weather's just rainy and. Like, San Francisco is rainy as hell today, too. It actually could be London right now looking outside. So
you would think San Francisco is great, but it's actually weather-wise not very great.
I know. I live like about 25 minutes outside of San Francisco, and often it's like gorgeous at my house. But then by the time I get to San Francisco, it'll drop from like 82 to 61 and kind of misty. You're like, wow. Well, let's start with just a high-level question. Where are we at with this release? I know it's coming. You guys talked about it targeting around the 25th, a release candidate sometime this week. Are we still roughly on track for that?
We are roughly on track. So we had originally set the freeze date for the 11th, so that will be yesterday. And then I think we have a lot of things in flight, and so we just didn't quite land it just yet. But on Friday we will freeze no matter what goes in, and what doesn't make the cut doesn't make the cut. And then we're still on track to release on the 25th, on point, on time for the 1-year anniversary of MCP.
Fantastic. So this week, you said there's still a lot of stuff in flight. I have been thinking of this personally for a while as the async release, just because it's been such a kind of a requested feature, and it's one that I know you've been targeting for this release. Is that still how you're thinking of this as one of the major, the kind of headline feature for this release is going to be async operations?
I do think that that's true. I think if you think about the 2 or 3 big things we still need to get done, asynchronous operations, what it was originally called, now it's called tasks, is really the one that made it into this release, at least in what I would call a minimal version of it. And we can talk about how we think about these type of things in the first place. But it is the asynchronous operations release if you care about features, and if you care about authorization, which is Darren's absolute favorite topic. Then I think the biggest part there is the adoption of something we called client ID metadata, which we can talk about a lot, which is a very cool way to replace the dynamic client registration. And it's something that was just ratified in the ITF as a standard.
Awesome. Why don't we do that then? Why don't we start with a little chat about tasks and maybe walk through, for somebody who's casually paying attention to MCP, what this feature is, how it's going to extend the MCP protocol, what it's going to mean for agent builders, and sort of what you see it as on a trajectory towards, like where do you think it's going?
Yeah, so task is really the idea that I think one of the pain points we have heard since a while is that tools allow for this like very natural synchronous operation where a model invokes a tool, you call it, and it returns a result. And that works great for these like standard requests, but I think for like long running operations, such as like particularly agents themselves, it is not really suitable. And what people have done in the past is they've modeled like some form of agent interface via tool calls, which is quite awkward to do. And then you have to have often the model deal with it. And so what tasks is taking a lot of these ideas that we have seen in the wild from other protocols, from implementations using building their own mechanisms around this with tools, and trying to build something into the protocol that is at the moment probably fairly bare bones, and see how we can build a primitive that is both minimal but also allows for a lot of ability for people to build around it in a meaningful way. And so in the most simple way, it is you have the ability to create a task, and a task can then have tool calls, other operations, and then you eventually get a result back, and you can in the median and intermediately poll for what's the status of the task. That's really what this is about in the beginning. So just a building block for long running operations.
So if I'm calling this as a user, right? I'm a user. I've added let's just say a Gmail MCP, and I want this to go out and do some analysis of my emails from the last 3 months, and look for patterns, or maybe find all the different times I've done something. But I don't need it right away, and I want it to do a more thorough job. I've written a little bit more complexity into my request. Sounds like that would be an example of a task or something.
Deep research, what we would call deep research, is like the quintessential, you're absolutely perfect example. It's the quintessential example of like how you would want to have a long running operation, and how you would have a task in that regard that the client can keep track of and tell you, oh, by the way, I check every minute if this is completed, and now it's completed. I can tell you that there's a result, and then either continue the conversation or give you a result in form of, I don't know, like a markdown file or whatever it might be.
And so this would be something that's supported on the server side and the client side. You'll have a task support theoretically in clients, and task support on server side. So a server would say like, oh, by the way, I offer these types of tasks, or in a client side would say, I can send you these types of tasks.
It is more like the client can say, I want to create a task here. And now I can create, like, for example, then run a tool, and then eventually I get a task result back. I think that's more how we envision this for now. And so it's all client initiated in the most part. The only thing that the server will assign you like a task ID that you keep around and then keep track of on the client side. But as always, it's a feature that both client and server need to implement. And so it gives the ability to servers to provide long running operations, and clients will only take care of this if they support it.
Got it. So as a server builder, it sounds like I don't necessarily have to make a lot of changes to my server side MCP. I simply add support for tasks, and then how does or do I have to change some of my MCP capabilities to support this task? Like, what does it mean to a server builder?
Yeah, for the server builder, you can nothing in general changes. We're very careful about backwards compatibility, and you would just offer a new interface that supports like a task in the SDK of your choice, which effectively just means that the server will provide a capability to the client saying, I support tasks now. And then the client can say, okay, now that you support tasks, I send you like a create tasks request. And now you are supposed to create a task and do these long running operations.
Nice. So I don't have to actually, as a server builder, I don't have to try to figure out what the long running operations are going to be. That will kind of come from the client or the user through the client. I don't have to kind of say, oh, I offer these types of tasks or anything like that. I simply say I support tasks, and then I get a request that says, oh, run this as a task. And that will tell me it's asynchronous. I just provide it back in some type of way.
You will need to do some bookkeeping on the server side. So I think it will come with SDK support because, for example, in the standard case, you will have to assign as the server a task ID that you return to the client, and then you are responsible for basically managing the lifetime of the task on the server side, right? Like this can be a long run. This can be a spawning a Go routine or spawning like an async thing, or even a different process or whatever it might be. Or it might be as simple as just calling an backend API that is asynchronously per se, and gives you a webhook back. But like these type of things is you still need to do a lot of bookkeeping, not a lot, but a bit of bookkeeping on the server side. But this will be very likely taken care of by the SDKs.
Yeah.
And we're not fully sure yet. That's why we have a freeze. We were not fully sure yet how this will actually pan out in the SDKs. But I would assume that you have some form of like storage of task IDs that you can either do in memory or in a Redis cluster or something like that, and then you operate on, and so that other servers can answer polling requests for this. Yeah, so it's just a normal asynchronous operation. The only difference, I think that's the interesting part here, the interface currently is built in a polling fashion, so the client asks for updates to the task, and there's just yet no web hooks or something like that, but that will come in the future. That's what I mean with minimal. We have a very minimal implementation, and then when we see how people use it, we will build optimizations like webhooks into it as well, which we definitely know we want, but we just haven't gotten around doing it.
That was actually my next question, was just that. Where do you see this kind of extending? And it sounds like things like webhooks that allow the server to just tell it when it's finished, as opposed to the client's polling for it. That's a big one. Are there other big things you see enhancing this, tasks and async?
At the moment, they're built around the primitives that the protocol provides, but it's very easy to envision that you'll probably want some form of like maybe list of text output that the server side has done. Like if you think about mapping a classic conversational agent to a task primitive, you probably want a little bit more than resources, tools, and prompts, because prompts, the way it's written in MCP, is not the perfect fit. Maybe it is. Maybe it's good enough for this use case. We don't know yet if what pattern here emerges. But I think realistically, there could be, you can think potentially of one or two things that you might want to add here.
Very cool.
So for
and here's what Darren thinks.
But for the tasks, so is it now a new top level like entity?
Yeah.
But
it's the interesting one. It's the first one that's not a primitive. It's like a meta entity that allows you to basically get an ID that then you interact with that task ID with the different other primitives.
So, but there's actually like a create task, which is different, so it's not call tool. So like you guys went away from the async tool calling.
Yeah.
So what different, like, is this still the expectation is that like from somebody who's consuming MCP that you would just turn tasks like directly into tools that you would give to the LLM? Or
I
is it?
think it highly depends. I'm not quite sure. I think in general you will see yes. I think in general you will have tasks being just mapped to tools.
But does it have basically the same tool structure, like a schema, input schema and things like? Or is
Oh,
it?
tasks themselves have no structure. You just get a task ID. You then call a tool that is part of the task operation.
Oh.
So there's a question that came in while we were chatting.
I don't think I understand. I don't. So so what's the actual like sequence diagram of like so if I call like create task, so like the MCP client calls create task, it just gets an ID, and then once you have the ID, you can then just call tools.
So task is just like has a state, for example, like a status message, a time to live, a polling interval, and you can receive a task from there. And then let me make sure that I read this 100% get this right. Then I think you're gonna call, and then you call a tool with the let me take a specific message flow. So you basically get a task back, you get a notification, get a response. Okay.
What's the name of the SCP for this?
SCP 1686.
1686.
Yes.
I want to look at this real quick.
Do you want to throw it up on the screen, Darren?
Yeah, let's see. 1686. Should be in here. Okay. Yeah, I can share my screen. All right, this one. Okay.
Yes.
Start long run, and then get long run. So,
you can also, if you want to, you can also look at the schema if that is more helpful.
Creating tasks. So, create a task. Oh, interesting.
David, who is it that's been kind of driving this?
That is the folks from AWS.
From AWS. Anyone leading that on their side?
Luca and Nick from the AWS. Nick is the core maintainer on this, and then Luca is one of the working group maintainers for agents working group.
So there's a task list, task delete. This is fascinating. I had no. So the
yes. So you will create a task, then send a tool request, for example, with an input to for example, to an agent, and you get eventually a task result back.
So you because this is here. So like so you would put this would actually say like call tool or tools call or whatever the method is.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And then you just provide the task ID.
Yes, because it's not just tools. You could technically have asynchronous anything in that way in the protocol. And so it's forward compatible with whatever you put in later into the protocol because you're not binding it to tools. And you could technically retrieve a resource asynchronously if you really wanted to. It is probably not a good idea, but as a primitive, it composes nicer because it's not an addition to tools.
And then there has to be some capability somewhere in the client client capabilities and server capabilities then?
Yes, there are server and client capabilities that will have different options to the task. Like does a task support cancellation? Does a task support requests like tool calls? And other things.
Okay, so the server
or elicitations for example.
Right. Wow.
Or
so this wasn't what you were expecting.
Sampling could be. Sorry, what?
I was saying, Darren, this wasn't really what you were expecting. Then because we had chatted about this.
Well, it's more generic. So before, because there was a one before which was like just for tool calls.
Yes.
But this is more generic.
Yes. Which makes it a little bit harder for to make sure that we're getting a good client story out of it, which is always a bit of the balancing act in MCP of like we're somewhat undescriptive about how clients should behave, and we should probably be a little bit more prescriptive. But at the same time, the composability is what's quite nice about it, and so we are looking for these patterns to emerge based on it.
Yeah, I mean, I can see. Wow. Yeah, this is quite different and really quite complicated. Because, like, if the server has if you have like 2 tool calls, so like you could use the same task ID for 2 different tool calls.
Of course, yes, because you might have gotten like something back in the meantime, not a final result.
Yeah. Ooh, that's difficult. Because then there's like you get the output, right? So then how do you get the output on it? So let me look.
So the output can be a tool output, right? Like that you can get. Listing. But then you can also get a final task output.
So what happens if response? So I say task result, and I give my task ID, and then what happens if there was 2? If I made 2 separate tool calls?
Sorry, what do you mean?
Oh, because is it like, because when I say create a, like, so I create a task, which gives me the let's see. Sorry, is the task ID allocated by the client?
No, that was one of the most recent changes. It's allocated by the server for the most cases.
Yeah. So my question was, if I say like if I call tool, like 2 different tool calls with the same task ID, then I say get task result. What is the expectation of the result? So
in my mind, let me take another look. If I remember this correctly, and I need to really carefully read this now again, you can have multiple tool calls, but the result is independent. So you can take, for example, a tool call as input to an agent that is operating on something. So let's, like, you create a task, you get it, you can get tasks, you receive task results. And the result here is let me take a look at the exact type of the result. Where is the task result interface task? Wait a second. So the result of it, do you see in retrieving task results to 3.3, you're getting a list of results basically back in the content?
Yeah. So when you get the result, the result here, but like if I had 2 separate tool calls, then I would have 2 content lists. How would you correlate those, or what would you expect?
So you're still doing the tool call, right? You're still getting some form of result back from that specific tool call. And then that's just input to the task, and the task is a separate result, if that makes sense. That can be, for example, like a conversation.
Yeah. Huh.
So Darren, are you confused about like how it would not like whether the server will wait till all the tasks or all the tool calls are completed before returning the task? Is that
So
the
I think
is
the
that the
interesting
question?
part is it's not just one. It's not just one long running tool call. It's you create a task and then you can have multiple interactions, standard MCP interactions with that task, and at the end you get a final result back from that task. And that can be, for example, multiple objects that can be, like for example, a conversation.
But if I call a tool with a task ID,
Yes.
that tool will still be a synchronous tool call, right?
Yes, of course. But it's input into it. Like the result might be nothing, right?
Oh, so if I give a task ID, when I make the tool call, then the tool might return back nothing because
Yes.
you're expecting that to be asynchronous now.
Yes.
Yeah, this doesn't make any sense to me. This is really confusing.
It is. I think you need to really think of
Yeah.
it's complicated. I agree, and you need to see how it will pan out on the actual SDKs. But what it is basically built around the idea to just like compose the idea of creating a task and the inputs and outputs being standard MCP primitives to that tasks. That's the basic goal.
Yeah, but it's the one to many that I don't get. Like if I have many tool calls inside of one task, I don't see how that actually works. Because I'm just thinking in my own stupidity, I've written complete implementations of the MCP protocol, client, server, everything. So we've kind of implemented every aspect of it. So you get into all these warts of all the weird little corner cases and stuff. This one is tricky. So you said this was implemented because it's like before it was kind of like agent to agent was like the driving factor, but now this seems to have changed.
Agent to agent, I think, is just as similar here, right? Like if you have an agent on one hand side and an agent on the other hand side, one agent can create a task on one of the other agents and can help like turns of like input, getting an output back via tool call, and then the task continues on the other side, and then you do another tool and another return and output, and in the end you get a result back.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So is there a standard? Because if you say like I implement tasks, like the server says tasks, but the problem is like there's a lot of methods, and theoretically this could go on any method. Is there a standard error code for like task not supported?
Sorry, what do you mean? I'm not quite sure I follow.
Because for the task, so if the server says that it implements tasks, then that means technically any method you could put a task ID on. Right?
Not quite. It tells you. In the capabilities, it will tell you which ones do support it. Yes.
Oh, perfect. Okay,
yes.
Yeah.
Okay, it's like, yeah, maybe this is the thinking of the protocol person, like who's like, I think in abstract, like what does this actually like look like in composability aspects? Yeah. But what it effectively will do is for you, in 99% of the cases, it will be I support tasks with tools. Basically, that's it.
Yeah.
Right. That's what it will do. And then you will be able to go and have an agent on one hand side, get a list of tools from the other agent from the other side. You create a task and you can do a bunch of tool calls back and forth in order to steer the agent on the other side, and you finally get a result back. And in the case for like something like deep research, you would only do one tool call ever, which is the input to the deep research, and you eventually get a result out. And I think that's probably the best way to explain it. And I think it's great input having that discussion with you, Darren, for us to go and make like sure the documentation showcases these specific use cases and how they actually map to tasks. But the interesting part here, and I think that's so confusing when you look at the protocol, This is not how it will actually show up in the SDKs, right? In the SDKs, you will have abstractions like do an asynchronous tool call, right? And that's what you really care about. And that's what you really want to deal with. And then how it maps under the hood to the very specific of the protocol, that is like hopefully not your problem, but it allows for composability of these operations and for without having to duplicate, for example, tools and tasks and making them similar, and like then having to think about what are the different input formats to a task, and now you have duplication between tools and tasks and these type of things. And so that's why you have a more general mechanisms, because you can think of any operations that can be synchronously happen in MCP. Technically, just why can they not happen asynchronously, right? You can even make the argument there should have been asynchronously in the first place, and there should be just a mechanism to make asynchronous operations synchronous, right? That's how you can also think about this. So that's why it looks difficult to think about it from the protocol perspective. But in the SDK perspective, what you get out of the SDK is like, I want to make a long-running tool call, right? And that's what you actually care about.
Yeah. So I see this now. So in the server capabilities, so it seems right now it is really narrow. It seems to be narrowed down to just tool calls right now. Okay, that's good. That makes it significantly easier.
Yes. But then you can think about other primitives in the future where you can add these type of things. If that makes sense.
But I don't think the shape of this really accommodates very well for using the same task ID for multiple methods. I think that I would argue to say you should only use one task ID per method. Like, don't use it over and over again.
It depends. I think the case where you have two agents talking to each other via tool calls, like imagine you have an input tool. You have a pure input tool that steers a conversation on the agent, and you were calling it. You're getting some form of result back, and you were like, oh, it now does another operation, and you're sending the input tool again. You might want to associate it with the same task because you're steering the underlying task result, for example, if that makes sense.
Oh, okay, wait. But it seems there's no ability. Okay, all right. I think I just misunderstand this or whatever, because it's you send the request, tools call, and you don't put, because I think in this other one that had the ID actually in here. So when you call this, you say basically, I want a task.
I know, yeah. So that's the second part of it. Yes, you can start. Which one are you looking here at the? Am
I still sharing my screen? So I'm at the schema for tasks. So this is I'm just trying to poorly read the docs here. So when you create a task, the way you actually create it is like you would do a tool call, but then you just put in this special meta field, and then it's going to return back with. So this is very similar to how it was before. It just seems it was, or what I had read before, but it's just a little bit more generic.
You can do it. That's a round trip optimization at the end of the day. So that's round trip optimization. It's the same as if you would create a task, and so.
Oh really? Because I don't see.
No, we don't have even. No. Actually, I think I got this wrong. That's awkward.
Because I don't think I didn't see a.
No. We are thinking about it as create task, as this operation that happens. So in my mind, there's this is confusing because I said something that's actually not happening, but in my mind, I decompose it as such. So what's going on is you create a task still by sending an operation, and you're getting a task result back, like a task ID back in that same flow. So actually, yes, okay. Yeah. Okay. This has changed recently a lot, and I haven't looked at this version. I've looked into a version from a few days ago. You're right.
This makes more sense to me now. So the way you're going to create it is it just comes. So there is no specific create task method right now.
Yes.
It's just during the call.
Yes.
You can add. Oh wait, deprecated. What? How did we deprecate already? Task cancel. What is this one for? Huh. Okay. Okay.
These things, by the way, this has not landed yet, right? So this is just, by the way, like this is not like one of the important parts to remember here. This is not finalized yet. Right? This is
Yeah.
This is awesome,
you're
guys.
looking at an open SEP, right?
So that was my next question. Yeah, because it's like because I remember one of the last protocol one because I had asked like, oh, can there be some grace period for us? You know, like as people who are doing clients and stuff. So it's
But that's
so
what
the
this
idea-
is for, right? This is exactly what this is for. It's like we have this debated this for a long time. We haven't even finalized this. So we are in the review. We have said this is in principle how we like to have it happen, because we like the idea of like having this like separate mechanism from tasks and from tasks and having it not like bound to like just a tool. It was a long conversation. Like, do you just want to have a tool that has a is asynchronous or is operation? And so what you now have is we have this like rough shape, and we are still like this is what I mean with in flight. We are still finalizing this type of work at the moment, and so this is completely. This is not fully reviewed yet, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
this is awesome.
is the intention to merge this before the RC?
We need to merge this before the freeze. So today and tomorrow and the day after, we're going to review this more, because the general shape that hasn't changed. So we will still have these general principles of like you can create a task by sending the request. You're retrieving a task ID. You are from the server that is server associated, and from there on out, you're continuing to move on and get a result back effectively after you're able to poll for it. These principles have been done. What we're gonna do is we're gonna lock this, but like then we're gonna have client implementers actually implement it, and then we're gonna probably find a bunch of problems with it, as you described, right? I think these things can be confusing. Like even I got it wrong, right? Like my mental model from the beginning of it, from like having gone through 5 iterations, was like 3 iterations slow, and now I got it all wrong, and now it's super awkward for me, right? But in the end of the day, now we're gonna review this, and we're gonna go and have we're gonna have client implementers build it, and then we're gonna go and make changes to it if needed, even to the point that everything that is in the draft, we are still even reserving that we can remove it, because it's a draft, it's not a final thing, and if we're not happy by it, then we will remove it. And that is not, I don't think it's true for tasks. I think tasks will definitely stay, but I think it will there's 1 or 2 other things where we might want to pull it in the last second, because we just feel it's not there yet. And at the same time, what we're looking for at the moment is that the general shape is right, that we can be forwards compatibly changing it in the future, instead of getting it perfectly right now, because I don't think you can ever get it really right from the beginning at the pace that we are moving, and we're looking for like, what do we need to put into place now so that we can extend it later?
Yeah, and I like the approach. I mean, because you've introduced schemas for the tasks, but the existing type, let's say like tool call, it's just a meta field. So it's, that's kind of leaves it very flexible in that you don't have to, add a new typed field and then, later go, oh, that was a bad idea.
Yes, and that's a general, like you will see this way and way more, is like we have these like meta tags. Like there's a bit of a problem of like we might over abuse them, because we're now starting to shove everything into meta tags because they're just so convenient and like so uncommittal. And so there's a little bit of that as well. So we just need to be a bit careful of like how we deal with this, because otherwise you just become like a general key value like protocol that like has that you could add, that where you just lose more type safety instead of encoding it directly into the schema, which we
I mean, like the pattern, like the Kubernetes people, they would use annotations and put like an alpha in the key, alpha or beta, so like that's kind of a temporary thing while they're testing out the feature, and then
but some of them have stayed forever alpha, right?
No. So that's the idea. Is like alpha and beta have lifetimes on them. It's like no, that will disappear at some point, and then once it goes into a field, then that's like no, that will never disappear. Like we're committing it to it. So it gives you a grace period, like some period to kind of fool around with that, and then so you have this awkward time. But it's hard with protocols. I mean, this is the problem with protocols.
One of the interesting bit, by the way, about the approach of putting it into meta tasks is, and I'm not sure if you spotted it. It means that you can. So we set tools for client to server connections, but there's another way where we can create tasks. We can create tasks server to client for elicitations and sampling. You can have a sampling call technically that would be a task.
Oh yeah.
So there are additional operations where you can have.
Oh yeah, so I did notice because I saw that in the client. Okay, yeah, that makes sense because in the client capabilities, I saw task list and cancel, but there was no requests. So it's just
right. But if you look into the schema file, you will see under the client capabilities a list of task requests for sampling and elicitation. So which means the client can if you go to the pull request itself,
yeah. So if we go
and then in the schema type TS,
let me just
load the diff.
So you're saying the client capabilities.
Client capabilities, you will see under task for sampling. That's that where it defines what can you retrieve and which operations will support tasks, right?
That's nice. Having this is a big one. This is a really nice one. Right. Having asynchronous. Oh wow, that actually solves a huge problem for me. Oh, that's really nice.
Which problem does it solve for you?
Well, I have this general problem of like with an elicitation because the servers have to block on an elicitation, so it just makes it very awkward. Of like, if I want to ask a question and then the user comes by, 15 minutes later, it's like, well, most likely something timed out. I have, that elicitation's not valid.
Right.
So,
assuming that clients will implement it, right? Which is like it's a hard ask, but
very few clients even support elicitations right now. But I do. So
sampling, I think, is the obvious other one.
Yeah.
Clearly.
Yeah. I mean, this is the general issue kind of with MCP right now in that, like, adding new features is kind of dangerous in the fact that there's very few clients that actually implement all of the features. Yes. So it's kind of the thing. It's like, well, we're adding more, and we're still not, because it's like elicitations is one of like the really, like, I would love it if everyone supported it, but it's very.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. Like, this is a general problem where I'm not sure how I tried. Yes, you're right. Like, the problem is that basically most people use it for tool calling at the moment.
Yeah.
And there are clients that are very full featured, and there are some clients that get better at getting features. At the same time, you have this push for, like, we really want asynchronous operations, and that's a push that's not necessarily even coming from us, and it's not like, oh, I think it should be in there. It's like a lot of people asking for it, but then the reality is, like, you need to be very careful that the client implementers actually come and implement these type of things, and that at the same time you don't get protocol bloat and just put everything in it. And I think we are very fully featured already, and I personally think that task was the last big component that I feel is really needed that I can think of at the moment to build a system that, like, with the composability that MCP offers, to build like fairly feature-rich clients. And now it's just about building fairly feature-rich clients, and that's a hard work, right?
Well, it also feels like the client side, the pace of adoption and the popularity are kind of inversed, right? The less popular clients have better adoption in some cases. The more popular clients have the least adoption, or moving the slowest, partly just because of their scale. And so It's really
like Claude AI and ChatGPT. Like ChatGPT, I think only supports tools. Claude AI has technically support for resources and prompts, but in such a way that it's basically not really usable.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully, you know, it's like if we think the protocol is complete enough, it's like to a certain degree, try not to change it to just get people, because I mean, it's also from a, you know, for like OAuth is an interesting one where like it was so nice that it's like one of the great things about MCP when it started was like, oh, everyone kind of agreed on one OAuth approach. But unfortunately, we all agreed on the wrong one, I guess. So then it's like, so now we're doing like DCIM. So it's like, oh shoot, even within this like short period of existence, we already have kind of like, you know, oh, that's the old one. So it's like, I can totally get it. You know, if you're, you know, Anthropic, OpenAI, you know, massive products or whatever, where it's like, oh, you know, this could just stabilize for a little bit and everyone's happy with it, then I'll pick it up, you know?
Yeah.
So I can definitely see, you know, don't want to keep.
I definitely want to do this. I'm definitely at the point where I really want to have it more stable now. I think there are one or two big ones that we need to still do because they're just so painful to people. The OAuth situation is an interesting one. We can talk a little bit about like client ID metadata and what it tries to solve, because when we originally did the OAuth implementation, I think, and I'm very public about this, that I got the original implementation kind of wrong because I didn't understand certain requirements in the enterprise space really well. Then we had the OAuth people help us with a very good specification, and they at the time did recommend dynamic client registration, and they already knew that dynamic client registration is not great, and they knew the problems, and still they said there is nothing alternative, because what you're trying to do is building a plug and play, like every client can to talk to every server kind of infrastructure, which nobody really has succeeded on the web if you really think about it. And that's the only way you can do this. And so there were already use cases from Mastodon and others where they have tried use DCR or using DCR and are running into a lot of problems. And we had luck that some people implemented it, but then you had all these additional restrictions that I think you, Darren, talk about very publicly about, like, you know, effectively every client you need to they're restricting effectively the clients that actually can register by, you know, to certain domains that they know and have partnerships with. And so it does not feel like an open system. And so I think we have now and so what we have been doing in the meantime in the last 7 months is literally change or extend OAuth itself, right? We have worked with Aaron Parecki from Okta to literally write a new specification, which he had already had for a while, but I think this was the right moment for it. And that just got ratified for like 2 months ago, called client ID metadata, which just is effectively like you replace the client ID that used to be like a number that you get assigned by the server. And you replace it with like your client ID, you replace it by with a URL that has your client ID metadata, and then the server can act upon and then the server can use that instead. And I think, you know, that's a pretty big step both for OAuth as well as for us into that right direction to enable this, like n times m. You can just plug any MCP server into any client. But you're right. Like, as a result, we have moved exceptionally fast and maybe a little bit too fast. I need to slow down now.
Well, I mean, I don't think there's any problem with moving quick. It's like it's just one, you know, it's like when the scope keeps growing or something, you know. So it's like okay, this is what we're trying to accomplish. Once we have something that works, then it's like stop, you know, stop and stabilize for a while. Because
DCR didn't work. I think the TLDR DCR didn't work.
Yeah. So because I'm hoping because that was one of our big hangups with the with DCR, besides like the complexity of the expanding clients and, you know, managing the metadata and stuff like that, was the fact that it's not like that. Everyone was locking it up. Like, they would only do DCR to like whitelisted domains.
Exactly.
So, yeah. So it's like, I hope, because we had somebody on the context, I think last week, who was talking about this, And it's still not completely clear to me that like if we're getting to the point of like something that's more open where, you know, there doesn't have to be a service to service trust, but it's like a service to user to service trust. So as long as the user trusts both services, then it's fine. So I am like, I'd like to see how this pans out in practice if we end up with kind of the same thing, because there was some talk of like, oh, there'd be like registries of client approved client metadata or something like that. And that doesn't sound right, you know, because again, you just get into this thing. So it'll be interesting because I really do, because I really want to get to this point of you know, kind of anyone can just kind of talk to, you know, how else is like, you know, well, ideally, like, you know, ChatGPT could just reach out to the internet and, you know, talk to any site, you know, so as long as the user trusts them, which is basically they trust the DNS name.
Yes.
You know, then
Which is effectively what this is now, right? So
yeah.
Is that all going to land in this release? We expect this new client ID metadata to land.
Metadata has landed in a while. Yes, I think that's the second big one, and that has landed. So that's in the specification, and that's again, it's a very simple specification. I really recommend this. I do know very well because I think Aaron had worked with us on that for a while. And it's actually quite simplistic and quite beautiful. And I think if you look at it, you're like, why has OAuth never worked like this in the first place, to be frank? I think that's what you would think. You're like, why did I always have to get this weird client ID registered prior in advance and a client ID secret potentially, or client secret? And why can I not just give my client metadata via URL? And there are repetitions, like you will have, if you have a local application, you will still have to host a remote like a URL for your client ID, but I think that can, you know, that's I think the interesting part. But basically, what then happens is like you sending a request to the server with a URL, and the server can just check that that you and the actual client and the client ID metadata come from the same server, right? And then they can trust. They're like, okay, that's fine now.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see like all of these trust systems and everything, because I don't know if this is like, because I feel like it's because like Blue Sky did this, and you know, like kind of just standardize on the URL is that's what you trust, the domain name. It's like we've just kind of all collectively decided that the only trust system that exists on the internet is DNS.
Yes,
that's the only thing everything relies on trusting a domain name, certificates, everything.
Yes.
It's just,
yes, it all boils down to like, okay, what do you do? You're going to do DNS. Yes.
Yeah. Like that's the solution. It's always DNS.
Yes.
Yeah. My next thing I'm going to scream and yell around about auth is I would love to see if MCP standardized the idea of how, you know, if I have an MCP server, like I get a request, and then from that MCP server, I want to make a request somewhere else, is how to standardize that authentication. Because that's where like we're kind of, I've talked to a lot of people, and there's like these ideas of token exchange or token vault that seem to fit into this area.
Yeah.
But every vendor has a slightly different approach on it, but it seems like a pretty solid idea. But I'd love to see something like that, because it fundamentally is like, if I'm going to do this, you know, things talking to things on the behalf of users, you have this client identity, agent identities, and a server resource, and you know how to resolve those three things. Yeah.
Yes. I agree. I think for at least for it, for, you know, taking a token and then require like going to a backend API, what I've seen is token exchange. You're right, it's not like nowhere standardized, because effectively what we are telling, what if you really read the spec very careful, what it actually says is, as long as you bring a token, I don't care. If you don't have a token, you should probably use OAuth 2.1 to obtain the token. But once you have the token, go for it, right? Because people were, and that argument often comes up with like, but I want to send, I don't know, a predefined token, or I want to send an API key, which is a stupid idea and you shouldn't do it, but you might. Yeah. And the idea is like, just make it a token and encrypt it, and then you can still use it as a bearer token. And we don't tell you anything about what to do with the bearer token, like how it should look like, or does it need to come from OAuth, as long as you have the token.
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing in the protocol that says you can't, you know, have basically the only thing the protocol specifies is when authentication fails. It starts with the 401.
Yes, exactly.
So can I ask the non-technical question? Like, so this client ID metadata change, it's going to land. Is it implementable right now? Is it already exist in a way that, like, we're going to see people consuming this? Is it going to change the user experience when I'm accessing my MCPs quickly, or are most people still going to roll through the same OAuth experience that they've been experiencing? Like, does it change anything about the user experience, or is this all kind of back end to simplify?
It is for the most part backends. It's for most clients, authors that will have issues getting into these DCRs, and for people just don't support DCR at the moment. So it will make it like some IDPs just refuse to support DCR, but are willing to do client ID metadata. So in a perfect world, right? In a perfect world for a user, you should not care about how authorization is done. You should click a button and say, I want to be authorized, and be done, right? And that's the user experience you want. So for a user, it's not a problem. It solves a pain point. It tries to pave the way for solving a pain point, because I do think it will take a while for this to be everywhere.
So this is something that the clients have to implement, not the server side. For
Clients can provide, yes, clients can provide, servers have to also use it, and IDPs have to use it if you have an identity provider.
Okay.
All three of them have to be provided, and that's been the...
Is this already supported in most identity
providers?
The
identity provider
using Okta?
Yeah. I'm not quite sure about the exact state, but I know that a lot of them have committed to implementing it very soon.
Okay.
So does this accommodate for local host things like Claude Desktop, which is running on localhost?
Yes, Claude Desktop would have to have it, the client ID metadata on a domain that is not local, of course, right? Because the remote identity server needs to read it. That's the one drawback to it, right? You need to host it. That's the problem. And in that case, but because you're coming from localhost, the check might not be the check. I think is I need to look at the spec. I think the check was omitted if the domain name matches, because you're coming from localhost. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because you're not coming from the same domain as Claudia, like Claudia.
Yeah, I was thinking like every.
Yes.
I was just thinking like for something like for us, open source. It makes it a little harder. Because today, with the nice thing about DCR is it works with localhost. So like let's say our software, we do an MCP gateway, OBOT or whatever. I can just do Docker run localhost.
Yep.
I can run it on my laptop and then it just works. But if I was to do that on my laptop, it wouldn't work. If I was to spin that up on the cloud, then that would be fine. But locally, it doesn't. Yeah, that's one of the one drawback or whatever.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So we talked about tasks and async stuff. We've talked about identity. David, anything else? I mean, I'm sort of excited about extensions. Just the concept of this, it feels like it's going to be a pretty. I've already heard of a ton of people sort of targeting this and thinking about use cases for this. I was just talking to Sam at Bloomberg about their sort of inspection extension that they're kind of working on. So what's, maybe for people who aren't familiar, what's the whole idea around these sort of official extensions, and what do you see some of the early ones coming? Right. Why did you guys go this approach?
So if you think about we already talked about I think how MCP is a pretty big protocol by now, and I think we want to keep it we want to really keep it as lean as needed, without adding too much to it. But at the same time, there are certain verticals or certain domains where you want additional information. The one example is, for example, if you want to provide UI from an MCP server to your client, you probably want to have something does my client be able to render HTML? And I just give you HTML and some JavaScript and you can render it. But not every client can render JavaScript, can render HTML, right? And so one of these extensions to MCP for clients that are able to render a website is like MCP UI, for example, hopefully in the long run, or something like MCP UI. The OpenAI Apps SDK is very, very similar to that. And what they do is they're basically like, okay, if you can assume that the client can do this, here's this additional these additional fields. This is a specific pattern that we're basically using, like an MCP UI. For example, it means that the UI component comes from a resource often, and you just render it in line in the client. I think that's the kind of important part to it. And so that's one of these extensions where, like, yes, exposing UI via MCP is very useful, but it's not very useful for every client, just for a very subset. So it's not very useful to have it in the specification directly. The financial services is another really, really good example where in financial services you have legal requirements, for example, that the client must present certain information from the server in a very specific way. Like it must provide a citation. This has used data from this provider, and I'm legally required to tell you that this is the third-party provider this came from, for example. And so in a financial services industry, you want to have a way for the server to make sure that the client that connects to it applies certain certain rules and is basically compliant to a certain legal standard before you ever give it data. So that's a very classic problem in the financial space. Interesting enough, in the scientific space, you have the opposite problem where you're like, I want to write a client that only takes data from trusted sources, because I don't want flat earth whatever.gov like have an MCP server and offer me data that my scientists accidentally stumble over, right? And so they want to have clients being able to verify servers. And these are very specific use cases that the general MCP ecosystem doesn't require. So we have this idea of like extensions that we're kind of in the midst of developing with people that are in that space to like, here's a set of like additional metadata. Here's a set of maybe even additional methods or certain patterns, like in the MCP UI case, where there will be a resource that is called UI:// and then the client can interpret it in certain ways. And what we want to do is, on one side, offer the community a place where they can develop these extensions, but also for MCP itself to say, here's some extensions that we really believe you should probably implement if you care about this type of work, that we kind of recommend to make sure that the ecosystem doesn't have 5 different ones, but hopefully aligns on something that we feel is probably a good idea. So I think on the UI side, you will see something along those lines. I think in the financial space, you will see something along those lines. You can easily extend the same idea to how you deal with HIPAA data in the healthcare systems and so on.
So you're thinking of it like, it sounds like the extensions concept is potentially broad enough to support a wide variety of people implementing extensions, but that there would be some type of official extensions that are actually maybe incorporated within the broader ecosystem of the MCP universe.
Yes, yeah. I think we basically will have like a list of like recommended extensions that we feel are somewhat stable, that are probably under the same umbrella as MCP, so that we have certain guarantees over it. I think that's the idea.
Is that going to be there in this release? Like, is the support for extensions going to be there?
So extensions themselves is just a governance concept more than anything, because the extension points for it, like the meta fields, these type of things, they have always existed. And so you can already write these type of things. So if you look at the OpenAI Apps SDK, it's built on top of MCP, and it uses these extension points, but there's no official specification yet about like how this should work. But I'm curious, like I'm very interested in input. I'm very interested in input from people like Darren and you, like you've been deeply in the Kubernetes world. Well, like is this better to like make recommendations in an ecosystem, or is it better to just let the market figure it out over time? And I do believe in certain circumstances at the moment, like UI and maybe financial, it's probably good to recommend. In others, it probably takes time.
My experience with Kubernetes is exactly what you're saying, is that in certain circumstances, especially in places that it's really more of a debate about how far do you push the protocol. And if you kind of say like, I really want to keep the protocol pretty firm and we've got a clear idea here, but there are adjacencies that we think as a community of developers and consumers, client builders, server builders, are natural extension areas that we there's a lot of alignment around. I think seeing those things as kind of blessed, it will absolutely help them a lot. And, given the examples that you talked about, I don't know that there should even be a long-term necessary commitment to these things. I mean, I think it should be sort of almost like, we think this is the path, this is the one we're incorporating. And as things change, we'll adapt to things as they change. As if something comes along that's a lot better,
Yeah, definitely. I don't think they are not meant to become part of the core. I don't think that will ever be.
I mean, the thing, so it's like right now the specification, I mean, the MCP is fairly open in that, you can add new methods, you can add new fields or whatever. The thing that would be interesting, because I don't know what this extension looks like, is because kind of like Kubernetes kind of went into this where it's like, okay, you could extend the API, but then like once you extend the API, then you get into the situation of like, well, how can I basically kind of like dynamically discover and use those extensions in clients? It becomes a client issue of like, if there's not some way to kind of like understand a little bit of what that shape of those new things are, it's, then it's like, oh, do I need to write a whole new set of clients,
And that's the part of that will go into the specification, how you're going to do that, right? Like that, I think that's the key part that we require. And so there is an open specification enhancement proposal that talks about both the governance, but also in the long run about like, we'll talk about how you are like discovering them correctly. And there's questions around versioning and these type of problems, right? That fit into this type of issues, because the protocol is versioned, but then do you want to version extensions, and like how does all that work? Because now it gets very complex and in the dimensionalities of versionings, and synchronizing one version is hard enough, and doing it multiples across different extensions is basically a full dependency problem, similar to a package manager that you don't kind of want to deal with. And so there's open questions here. So it will not land now, Shannon. We have no extension mechanism just yet. There's a lot into the discussion at the moment.
In the next release after this, you anticipate it's kind of a 6-month basis right now. Is that sort of how you're imagining things? So if it doesn't land in this one, it'll probably land in the spring version.
Right. Yes, and I think the spring one, there will be one big thing in the spring one that will probably be around transports, because I think there's a lot of concerns still around long persistence connectivity that sometimes is required, and so most servers don't do bidirectionality at the moment, and so we're talking a lot about that. And I think that is, to be fair, I think the last big change I see, and everything else will be hopefully refinements over time. And I really want the protocol to slow down from there on.
Very cool, guys. I know we're like an hour in, and David is late in
we're trying to do 20 minutes.
We've been going for like an hour.
Well, but we had to relearn tasks, right? Like I had to page in how tasks work again after having seen it not for a while.
I did want to say, I want publicly, I want to get ACP as an official extension of MCP, so we can somehow figure out what that means. So
I would absolutely love to do that. I think ACP is a good idea. I love what the Z folks do, partly because I'm an avid Z user, but also partly because I like what they've done there, and it solves a bunch of problems, or a bunch of problems that people have on top of MCP that MCP itself doesn't solve. And I'm not sure MCP should solve. Maybe it should, maybe it shouldn't. But at least as an extension, it's a starting point. Then you can take the best parts and move them into the core protocol if they become like ubiquitous.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to wrap it up. This was awesome. And David, as always, love chatting with you, love diving into this. Congrats on making it almost to a full year and not losing your hair or your mind. Or
I have a lot of more gray hair.
I know.
A lot more gray hair. That's for sure.
It's been a crazy couple months too. There's just,
Yeah.
I mean, we could talk about so many other things that are happening. So hopefully we'll get you back on in maybe a couple months
Yeah.
and dive into things again and see you maybe out here in December. And yeah, it's exciting times.
Exciting times. Yeah, I'm really excited to see Darren. Like once this task is finalized, I'll send it your way, and I want you to harshest feedback, and then see what you're gonna do with it. Preferably
Yeah.
before this gets finalized. And I'm happy if you're not landing in a good spot that to push it back, because this needs to get really solid.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, with that, I'm going to end the stream. Everyone else, thank you, as always, David. Thanks, everyone, for sticking with us, the hundreds of you who are on here listening to this conversation. We really appreciate your time and so much excitement around MCP. It's a fun place to be working every day. I certainly love it. So, David, thanks again.
Thank you.
And take care, everyone.
Take care.